Welcome. We're joined by political consultant Eric Hacopian. Eric, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.
So the Foreign Minister, Zohrab Minatsakhanyan, has resigned. What do you think about this, and who do you think would be a suitable replacement?
It's about 50 days too late. I've talked about this issue before. Our diplomatic team has failed us on the highest level. I'm obviously not discussing functionaries in this office or that office. I'm talking about as people who have a vision of what needs to be done. And as far as Minatsakhanyan is concerned, one thing that gave me away that should have been the telltale that he shouldn't be there anymore is, the war started on Sunday. By Sunday night, he should have been in Abu Dhabi and Riyadh, because Turkey's two greatest enemies that are actually willing to act are not in the West. It's the UAE and Saudi Arabia. You go to the Saudis for money, they either give it to you or they don't. And you go to the UAE, which is considered little Sparta, who less than a month before the war started, bombed Turkish air bases in Libya using their French fighter jets. So they're obviously willing to act. And there was nothing that would have stopped them if they knew they were punishing the Turks to help us. Now, does that mean any of this would have worked? Nobody knows. Most likely not, because most efforts like this fail. But were you cognitive of that, or were you thinking about things in those lines? And when he wasn't thinking in those lines, it tells me that a country like Armenia can't afford someone who's not imaginative in foreign policy. As far as who can replace them, we have limited talent, especially given the level of negotiations that are going to happen. The only theoretical possibilities for me will be someone like Alexander Arzumanyan, who's our ambassador to Denmark and was former foreign minister, who's capable of doing the job. Obviously, Vardan Petrosyan, who's probably the best foreign minister we had in the post-independence period. And up until yesterday, I think the president himself could have been foreign minister given his relationships that we had. But I think that's out the door based on some of the developments from the last 24 hours. But we don't have that much talent, but I think we have enough old talent that can actually do a lot of good. And don't forget that the Azeri foreign minister is almost a joke, frankly. He has no diplomatic experience, and if there's talks to be had, any of these three individuals would run circles around him.
Well, you mentioned, and I want to ask about the speech made by the president, Armen Sargsyan, and he did call for snap elections, and some say the PM's resignation. And what do you think about this?
Well, it's quite unusual, but the president is essentially organizing the ouster of the prime minister, most likely because he wants to be prime minister himself. So, that's not that hard to figure out. Those are, I think he has done the calculation. If there are snap elections now, given his historic popularity, there were polls right before the war started in which I think Pashinyan was somewhere in the low 60s and Armen Sargsyan was 5 or 6 points ahead of him. And if you do the basic math, given the fact that Armen was not personally responsible for the war, Pashinyan would have taken a tremendous hit while he would have taken a limited hit. So any kind of an election now, if Armen is running for prime minister, he would probably win or have a very good chance to win. So I think this is just a straight up power move for a job that he wants at this point, which is to be prime minister of the country rather than the president.
And the president did suggest that a government of national accord should be formed, or a unity government. What do you think about this? How would this work exactly?
Well, he needs to explain that. There's something, you have to be very clear about what do you mean by a national unity government? There's nothing wrong with it in principle. If the national unity government means that you go and find the best and the brightest from the country and the world, and you bring them to help right the ship or help the country at its most critical moments, who could be against that? But on the other hand, if a national unity government is simply a ploy, and I'm not implying that this is the president's plan, I'm just thinking in broader terms. If it's simply some political ploy for a backdoor to bring back a lot of discredited people who in elections less than 2 years ago that they couldn't cheat or buy votes in, couldn't even enter parliament with 5% of the vote, that's not a good thing. So if the objective is to have the best and the brightest, we should all be for it. If it's a cynical attempt to bring really discredited people back, then we should all be against it, and we should be very clear about that. I think it's important for the president, if he's making this case, to be clear about who he does not want to be associated with up front, not who he wants to be associated with. There's plenty of people. And frankly, even in the lines of the old regime, there are good people who were part of the system. I'm not saying you should, but he needs to tell us who's not going to be part of this, if this thing is going to have a chance of moving forward.
And I want to ask about the idea of snap elections. Do you think that there's a possibility that snap elections could cause more instability even?
Well, almost certainly. I mean, instability is not the right word. It's more lack of certainty. Because right now, there's 1,000 things that need to be done. And I don't think you need an election right now. Because now you should be focused on the immediate things. Now, it doesn't mean you don't change the government. It just doesn't mean you don't have an election. You can have elections 6 months from now. You can have elections a year from now. I don't think you need elections now. Because in a polarized environment like this, I'm not convinced that people can even make the right choices, given how emotional everything is. And it'll simply just cause more chaos, I think, in the short run. And given the parliamentary majority that Pashinyan has, the extent of it, he could survive this because they have a mandate. It doesn't mean he will, because at some point there can be people who are ambitious in his own party who might want to make a move. But I don't think we need elections now. Snap elections, I think, will be, any campaign will be 3 months from now, and it's going to cause more dissension, more polarization, and I don't think it's going to be helpful to the country at this point. But again, that does not preclude changing prime ministers within Pashinyan's party, because they have the majority and they can say, well, you need to go and we pick somebody else. And frankly, they can pick anybody. It doesn't even have to be from their party. You could have a national consensus person. I think where this national consensus thing is very relevant, and I think this is where it should be done, is I think in the context of these foreign policy negotiations and negotiations with Karabakh, these should not be the work of one party. I think you can separate this and have it be that on that particular front, this is a national issue, and everyone must have their say, and everyone should be part of the process. So it should not be a party negotiating this. It could be something that's far more ecumenical, and you have people, you get the best and the brightest on your team, and they go negotiate to get the best they can. And in that way, whether it's good and whether it's bad, everybody owns it. So I think it's actually smart for the government, if it intends to stay, that when it comes to this particular issue, which they have the least amount of credibility on because of the document that they signed, even though they had no other choice to sign, but that's a whole other argument, the discussion. It would be best to depoliticize these negotiations and make it a national issue while politicking goes on in all other fronts. So I think that on that front, I think these negotiations are too important to be partisan.
And of all the political developments going on right now, what do you think people should be paying attention to most of all?
Listen, again, as I've said before, we should not be obsessed with individuals. People can come, people can go. What's important is that the reform process continue. The anti-corruption process continue, because they're one and the same in many ways. We need to be very clear that the number one task here, domestically, is to make sure that this crisis is not used by the worst elements in the society who ruled for 20 years and put us very much in the condition that we are today, in the position that we are today, to be allowed to come back into power. That is the most important thing. Other people, other good people can come, good people can go. That's fine. We should not be obsessed with individuals. This is not about individuals. This is about systems. But we cannot allow this crisis to be used by the worst people to come back to power, to continue to do all the things that impoverish the country and put us in this current situation. I think people need to understand that is the number one political goal domestically. Everything else flows from that. Once that issue has been dealt with, that there's no back road for these discredited people to come back, then let the best win. Let the best arguments win.
And finally, I want to ask, a lot of people are very concerned and stressed about this current political crisis going on. I want to know, what would your message be to them?
Grow up. This is how democracies work. You lose a war, you fail, people will ask for you to leave. Last I checked, no one's been killed, thank God. This is how democracies work. This is our strength. This is not our weakness. If Aliyev would have lost the war, there'd be dead bodies in the streets of Baku right now. Because he's either killing people to stay in power, or people are trying to kill him. So this is a sign of maturity. Yeah, is it like roughhousing? People get beat up, attack the parliament. Yeah, there's always a thuggish element in every political system. But this is how democracies work. I'm proud of this crisis. How can you not have a crisis when you lose a war like this? Of course you're going to have a crisis. It's a question of how you handle that crisis. Your response to the crisis reveals far more to you than the fact that there's a crisis. So right now, yeah, the president, it's a soap opera, the president's plotting against the prime minister. But that's how politics works in a democratic state. We should be proud of it. We shouldn't be, is it uncomfortable? Yeah, of course it's uncomfortable. It's much better to have a state system where, we go back 6 months. Who wouldn't exchange today's time for 6 months ago? Everybody would. We'll take the worst days of COVID over this in a heartbeat, But there's nothing to despair. This is, there's this tendency in the diaspora, it's like, they think Armenia is like some social club like you have in Tehran or Burbank or in Beirut. It's a country. What does that mean? It means you have a political crisis. Bad people will use the opportunity of a crisis to get rid of good people. In the same way that in a crisis, good people will use a crisis to get rid of bad people. This is just the way it is. And just, you want to make sure that it is smooth, it's non-violent, nobody gets killed, nobody gets hurt, and you reach some sort of a consensus and you move on. But we should be proud of this crisis, because if we didn't have a crisis, then we don't have a healthy democracy.
Well, Eric, thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on CivilNet.